For centuries, storytellers spoke of a sword so powerful it could choose the true king of Britain, a weapon said to shine brighter than steel, yet vanish without a trace. But what if King Arthur's Excalibur wasn't just a myth? What if the legendary sword did exist and was lost to time? Today, we're diving deep to uncover whether Excalibur is mere legend or a forgotten artifact buried beneath centuries of history. Mist drifts over ancient hills. A hand rises from the water, holding a blade that gleams under the sun. For over 1,000 years, this image has haunted legends, inspired warriors, and puzzled historians. Excalibur, the mythical sword of King Arthur. But where did this story come from? And is there any truth hidden behind the myth? Welcome to your channel name, where we uncover the hidden truths behind history's greatest mysteries. In this episode, we'll journey through myth and archaeology to find out. Was Excalibur ever real? The story of Excalibur Docent begin with steel or swordsmiths. It begins with a dream, the dream of a Briton lost in chaos, longing for a true king. The people needed a hero, and out of myth that hero took shape, King Arthur. But what makes Arthur's tale immortal isn't just his courage or the Knights of the Round Table. It's the mysterious weapon he wielded, a sword said to hold divine power, a sword that would one day be known as Excalibur. Imagine a time when the line between myth and history blurred, the 5th or 6th century after the Romans abandoned Britain. The land was fractured, divided by warring tribes and shadowed by invaders. Legends say that in this chaos rose a boy, not of noble birth but destined by fate to unite a kingdom. His name was Arthur, and his destiny was bound to a weapon that would change the course of British legend forever. The earliest whispers of Arthur's sword appear in medieval chronicles and Celtic tales. Some call it Caladfulch, an ancient Welsh name that later evolved into Excalibur. In these early stories, the sword wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol. It stood for purity, justice, and the divine right to rule. But even then, the details were shrouded in mystery. Was Excalibur forged by human hands, or was it a gift from the gods? Was it real metal or pure magic? No one could say for sure, and maybe that's what made it timeless. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, written around 1136, Arthur's sword is described as a magnificent blade, unrivaled in power and beauty. Geoffrey doesn't call it Excalibur yet, but he lays the foundation for what it would become. His stories spread across Europe, enchanting kings and commoners alike. Soon, Arthur's legend became a mirror for every ruler who sought divine legitimacy. To hold a sword like Excalibur wasn't just to command an army, it was to command destiny itself. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the Arthurian tales had evolved into something greater. French poets like Chrétien de Troyes and later English writers began weaving their own versions of the story. The sword gained its name Excalibur, derived from the Latin ex chaos liberatus, meaning freed from the stone. The name alone carried power, the idea of liberation, of destiny revealed, of kingship born not of blood, but of worthiness. But what made Excalibur's birth so captivating wasn't only its mystical origin, it was the message buried beneath it. In an age when kings rose through bloodlines and armies, Arthur's claim to the throne came through divine selection. A sword stuck fast in stone, waiting only for the hand of the rightful king, that was more than a tale. It was a challenge to every ruler who believed power came from lineage. Excalibur declared that true kingship was earned, not inherited. Yet even in these early accounts, Excalibur was no ordinary sword. It was described as unbreakable, blazing with light, sometimes said to blind enemies in battle. Some stories claimed it could cut through iron as easily as cloth. Others whispered that it had been forged by fairies or enchanted by Merlin himself. Every retelling added new details, new powers, new mysteries, and with each version, the line between myth and possible history grew thinner. Was there perhaps an actual blade that inspired the legend? Historians and archaeologists have long debated it. Ancient swords found in Britain from the post-Roman era show remarkable craftsmanship, some even inlaid with silver or inscribed with runic markings. To the people of that age, a sword wasn't just a tool of war. It was a sacred symbol, passed down through generations, believed to carry the spirit of its owner. It is not impossible that such a relic could have sparked the tale, a blade so magnificent it seemed touched by the divine. As the centuries passed, storytellers added more depth to Arthur's world. Camelot, Merlin, Guinevere, the Knights of the Round Table, but at the heart of it all remained Excalibur, the sword that made the king. And while every retelling gave it a slightly different birth, the essence remained the same. Arthur was chosen, not by man, but by destiny itself. The birth of Excalibur's legend reflects something deeper about humanity. Our need to believe that power can be pure, that leadership can be just that somewhere in the mists of time there existed a ruler whose authority came not from greed or bloodshed but from something higher. Excalibur became the ultimate symbol of that hope. From ancient Celtic folklore to the grand halls of medieval Europe, the story of Arthur. And his sword traveled far and wide, shifting with every culture it touched. For some, Excalibur was a divine weapon of light. For others, a relic of the gods. And for many, a metaphor, the blade that cuts through corruption, the light in an age of darkness. And so the legend began, not as a tale of war, but as a tale of worthiness. The sword wasn't just drawn from stone or water. It was drawn from belief. The belief that even in the darkest of times, destiny could rise and shine like steel. The birth of Excalibur was more than the birth of a weapon. It was the birth of an idea that would echo through history, forever binding myth and truth together in a single gleam of light. Every great legend is born from mystery, and the story of Excalibur is no exception. But what if I told you that the sword wasn't born once, but twice? That's right, history gives us two origins for Excalibur, and both are so powerful, so symbolic, that for centuries scholars and storytellers have debated which one tells the real truth about King Arthur's destiny. One version speaks of strength and divine selection, the famous sword in the stone, the other whispers of enchantment and magic, the Lady of the Lake. Together, these two tales create one of the most haunting and debated legends in all of history. Let's begin with the version everyone knows, the sword in the stone. Picture this. The kingdom of Britain is leaderless, torn apart by rival lords fighting for power. The people are desperate for a true king. Then, one winter morning, in the heart of London, something extraordinary appears, a massive stone with a sword embedded deep in it. Inscribed on its blade are the words, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is right-wise king born of all England." Crowds gather, nobles try their luck, warriors strain with all their might, but the sword refuses to move. Then comes a young boy, no armor, no crown, no claim to power. His name is Arthur. He steps forward quietly, takes the hilt, and with effortless grace, the sword slides free. The crowd gasps. The world changes. In that moment, destiny chooses its king. This version of the legend, told most famously by Sir Thomas Malory in Le Morte d'Arthur, became the cornerstone of Arthurian myth. It represents divine right, the idea that true leadership is chosen by fate, not birth. The sword in the stone is more than a test of strength. It's a soul. Only one pure of heart and destined by higher powers could release it. For medieval audiences, this was not just fantasy. It was divine validation, proof that kingship could come from virtue rather than lineage. But there's another version, older, stranger, and far more mysterious. In this telling, Arthur already reigns as king when his sword is shattered in battle. Desperate and wounded, he turns to Merlin, his mystical guide. The wizard leads him to a quiet lake shrouded in mist. From its surface rises a hand, delicate, glowing, and holding a new sword. The Lady of the Lake, an ethereal guardian of magic, offers the weapon to Arthur. He takes it, and the legend of Excalibur is born anew. This version adds layers of magic, mysticism, and divine femininity to the tale. The Lady of the Lake represents something the sword in the stone never could, the otherworldly forces that guide human destiny. Where the sword in the stone symbolizes divine judgment, the lady's gift symbolizes balance, the union between mortal and mystical realms. The moment she offers the sword, Arthur becomes not only a king by destiny, but a bridge between worlds, between man and magic, earth and spirit. Historians believe these two versions came from entirely different traditions. The sword in the stone motif likely stems from early Christian symbolism, where God's will decides who is worthy. It echoes biblical themes, a chosen one rising from obscurity to lead his people. The Lady of the Lake, however, draws from far older Celtic mythology, rooted in pagan beliefs where lakes and rivers were sacred gateways to the spirit world. Ancient Britons often offered swords and treasures into waters as sacrifices to their gods. Archaeologists have even found real Iron Age swords buried beneath lakes across Britain, a haunting reminder that perhaps, long before the legend, there was a ritual truth. The merging of these two stories over centuries created one of the richest myths in European history. Some storytellers, like Mallory, tried to reconcile both. The sword in the stone and Excalibur were different swords. The first proved Arthur's right to rule. The second, gifted by the lady, symbolized the mystical power that sustained him. Others believed they were the same sword, drawn from the stone by divine will, returned to the water by divine grace. Either way, both origins carry the same message. Arthur's power came not from conquest, but from something greater, the unseen hand of destiny. But what's most fascinating is how these two origins reflect two sides of human belief. The sword in the stone speaks to logic, to faith, to the idea of moral worth. It's about the purity of the soul, the right to rule, the concept that power must be deserved. The Lady of the Lake, on the other hand, whispers of mystery, of magic, fate, and forces beyond our understanding. One version satisfies the mind, the other stirs the imagination. Together, they tell us that Arthur's reign wasn't just political, it was spiritual. And hidden beneath both tales lies a question that still lingers. Which story came first? Was Excalibur originally a divine relic of water and enchantment, or a test of destiny carved in stone? Scholars have searched ancient manuscripts, tracing versions back to Welsh mythology, where heroes wielded blades blessed by goddesses or drawn from sacred pools. Even the name Caladfulch, the Welsh root of Excalibur, appears in early Celtic texts centuries before Arthur's Christianized image. This suggests that long before knights and kings, long before the sword shone with legend, there was already a story of a blade born from the water, a relic of power guarded by spirits waiting for a chosen one. So, perhaps the two versions are not contradictions, but evolutions. The pagan myth and the Christian parable intertwine through time. The sword in the stone represents the earthly test, the visible act of worthiness. The Lady of the Lake represents the divine mystery, the unseen blessing that follows. One crowns the king, the other empowers him. And within these dual origins lies the timeless truth of Arthur's legend, that greatness is never granted by one force alone, but by the harmony between the world of men and the mysteries that lie beyond. Every legend has a spark, a fragment of truth buried under layers of storytelling, time, and imagination. The tale of Excalibur, the shining sword of King Arthur, is no different. For centuries, people have wondered, was there ever a real blade that inspired this legend? Could a piece of metal from the mists of early Britain have given birth to one of the most powerful symbols in Western mythology? To find the truth, we must leave the world of wizards and kings and step into the soil of history, where myth meets archaeology and stories begin to take physical form. To understand Excalibur's possible origins, we must first look back to the world that shaped King Arthur's myth, post-Roman Britain, around the 5th or 6th century. This was a time of collapse and chaos. The Roman Empire had withdrawn, leaving behind ruins, fractured tribes, and scattered warlords. It was an age where myth and history intertwined naturally because the truth was often carried by word of mouth, wrapped in poetry, memory, and myth. In this violent and uncertain world, swords weren't just weapons. They were sacred symbols of power and legitimacy. To possess a sword of superior quality was to carry authority itself. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous weapons from this era across Britain and Western Europe, blades buried with warriors hidden in lakes or preserved in bogs. Many of these swords show an astonishing level of craftsmanship for their time. Some were forged with intricate inlays of gold or silver, and others carried mysterious inscriptions. These weren't ordinary weapons of war. They were status symbols, ritual objects, and heirlooms meant to accompany leaders into the afterlife. One might imagine that to the people who found them, these blades would seem supernatural, a sword that gleamed when all others rusted, a weapon that seemed unbreakable, perhaps even divine. One of the most intriguing finds comes from the English county of Somerset, where a beautifully preserved sword was discovered in a lake bed. A sword dating back to roughly the same era as the supposed life of King Arthur. Its placement was no accident. Ancient Celtic tribes believed that lakes and rivers were sacred doorways to the spirit world. Offering a weapon to the water wasn't a loss. It was a gift, a tribute to the gods. Could this practice be the seed from which the Lady of the Lake legend grew? Perhaps long before storytellers spoke of her hand rising from the water, real people had already been casting their blades into sacred lakes, believing the water spirits would protect their kingdom in return. But the mystery deepens when we examine early Celtic mythology. Long before Arthur, there were tales of heroes wielding magical swords with names and personalities of their own. In Welsh myth, there's Excalibur, a blade so powerful it could cut through iron as if it were silk. In Irish legends, there's Calibog, the sword of Fergus mac Roich, which could slice the tops off hills. These names and stories share uncanny similarities with Excalibur, leading many historians to believe that Arthur's sword was an evolution of much older Celtic hero myths, a reimagining of pre-Christian folklore shaped to fit the Christianized narratives of the Middle Ages. Even the very act of drawing a sword from a stone may have ancient roots. Some researchers point to the ritual of sword testing, the practice of embedding a newly forged blade into an anvil or stone to test its strength and temper. A sword that could be removed without breaking symbolized perfection and divine blessing. Over time, such a ritual could have transformed in legend into Arthur's divine test, a literal pulling of destiny from the stone. There's also the possibility that Excalibur was inspired by real royal swords known across Europe during the Dark Ages. For example, the sword of the Frankish king Childeric, or the ceremonial weapons buried with Anglo-Saxon kings like those at Sutton Hoo, magnificent blades, adorned with jewels, gold filigree, and Christian symbols. These swords were not just weapons. They were embodiments of divine kingship. The craftsmanship was so advanced that, to the eyes of common people, they might have seemed forged by magic. It's not hard to imagine how such an artifact, centuries later, could become the Excalibur of legend, a weapon not of this world. The connection between myth and archaeology doesn't end there. In 2011, divers discovered a mysterious sword embedded in the mud of Dosmary Pool in Cornwall, the very lake that folklore claims as Excalibur's resting place. Though later identified as a 13th century weapon, the discovery reignited fascination with the possibility that these myths were born from real places and real artifacts. For believers, it was a sign that perhaps the legend was never just a story, perhaps the past had left traces waiting to be uncovered. But maybe the real truth behind Excalibur isn't about one sword at all. Maybe it's about what swords represented to the people of early Britain: power, honor, divine will. In a world where written history was rare and oral storytelling reigned, one magnificent blade could easily become the centerpiece of legend. Over time, as different tribes, poets, and monks retold the story, that real sword could have taken on new names, new powers, and finally, new meaning. The deeper we dig into history, the more we see that Excalibur was more than metal. It was an idea, an ideal of leadership and divine favor that echoed across centuries. And while we may never find a physical Excalibur gleaming beneath the waters of some forgotten lake, the artifacts and traditions we've uncovered show us that something, a ritual, a sword, a story, once existed that inspired it. Somewhere in the ancient myths of Britain, a real blade may have caught the light just right, and in that reflection, a legend was born. The legend of Excalibur does not rest quietly in old books or dusty scrolls. It breathes through the curiosity of every explorer, diver, and historian who has ever wondered, could the legendary sword of King Arthur still exist somewhere beneath the waters of Britain? Could a relic so powerful, so deeply tied to myth and destiny have survived the passage of centuries? The search for Excalibur has become more than a quest for an artifact. It is a search for proof that the boundary between legend and history might not be as solid as we think. The story begins where the legend itself ends. In the closing moments of Arthur's tale, the great king, mortally wounded after his final battle at Camlan, commands his knight Bedivere to return Excalibur to the lake from whence it came. Bedivere hesitates twice, unwilling to part with such a magnificent weapon, but on the third attempt, he finally throws it. From the still waters, a mysterious hand rises, catches the sword, and vanishes beneath the surface forever. That image, the sword disappearing into the lake, has inspired centuries of seekers to find the truth. If Arthur's final command was real, then somewhere, hidden under centuries of silt and legend, Excalibur may still be waiting. One of the first places linked to this legend is Dosmary Pool, located on Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. To the casual eye, it looks like an ordinary body of water, shallow, quiet, almost haunting in its stillness. But to local folklore, it's sacred ground. For generations, people have said that this is where Bedivere cast the sword. The story became so deeply rooted in the local culture that, even today, visitors come to the pool to gaze across its dark waters, hoping to catch a glimpse of something glimmering beneath the surface. In the 20th century, amateur divers and treasure hunters searched its muddy depths, claiming to find fragments of ancient blades. Most were later identified as medieval replicas or tools, yet the legend refuses to fade. Every few years, new rumors emerge of something metallic and mysterious discovered in the lake. But Dosmary Pool isn't the only site tied to the Excalibur myth. Across Britain, dozens of lakes, ponds, and rivers have been named by locals as the possible resting place of the sword. In Llyn Llydaw, a glacial lake in Snowdonia, Wales, a long-standing tale claims Arthur's final battle took place nearby and that Excalibur, or Caladfulch, as it was called in Welsh, was returned to its depths. Divers have explored these icy waters, discovering ancient weapons, coins, and relics, but none have ever matched the mythical description. Still, the mystery deepens every time something from that era surfaces, fueling the idea that perhaps the truth is simply waiting for the right eyes to find it. One of the most famous modern discoveries came in 2011, when a young girl named Matilda Jones was swimming with her father in Dosmary Pool and spotted a sword lying beneath the shallow water. The image went viral almost instantly, a child finding Excalibur in the very lake said to be its home. The sword, of course, turned out to be a film prop left there years earlier, but the coincidence was too magical to ignore. It was as if the legend was teasing us, reminding the world that its mystery still lingers just beyond reach. Archaeologists, however, take a different approach to the search. Instead of diving into specific lakes, they study the ritual practices of ancient Celts and early Britons. These people often deposited weapons and valuables into lakes and rivers as offerings to deities. Countless swords have been discovered in places like the River Thames, the River Witham, and Llyn Cerrig Batch, each meticulously crafted, often decorated with gold or silver and deliberately bent or broken before being submerged. This ritual destruction symbolized the offering of the weapon spirit to the gods. Many of these swords date back to the Iron Age, long before Arthur's supposed time, yet their presence gives tangible weight to the myth. It shows that the idea of a sacred sword beneath the water was not just a story, it was a real tradition. One of the most intriguing finds came from the River Witham in Lincolnshire, where a beautifully preserved sword was discovered in 1825. The blade bore an inscription in gold letters, plus NDXOXCHDXORVI plus. For nearly 2 centuries, historians have debated its meaning, linking it to magical or religious symbolism. Some have even called it England's Excalibur, though scholars now believe it to be a 13th century sword belonging to a noble or knight. Its mysterious aura continues to draw comparisons to Arthur's legendary weapon. Beyond the lakes and rivers, other seekers have looked to ancient burial sites. Some believe that when Bedivere cast Excalibur into the lake, it was later retrieved by the Lady of the Lake and returned to Arthur's side in Avalon, the mythical resting place of the king. If Avalon was real, could the sword still lie buried with him? The location of Avalon has long been debated. Some say it was Glastonbury, a place steeped in myth and mist. In the 12th century, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have found Arthur's tomb, and while no sword was discovered with it, the claim reignited centuries of fascination. Every so often, new expeditions emerge, divers in Cornwall, metal detectorists near Welsh lakes, even scientific teams using sonar and drones to scan lake beds for metallic signatures. Though none have confirmed the discovery of Excalibur, each search brings something unexpected, a piece of history, a forgotten relic, or simply a renewed sense of wonder. And perhaps that's the true allure of the search, the idea that somewhere in Britain's ancient waters, the reflection of a sword might still gleam beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Excalibur is more than a sword. It's a symbol, one that has echoed across centuries, transcending myth to become a reflection of something far deeper within the human spirit. To understand why this single weapon became one of history's most powerful legends, we must look beyond its blade and into what it represents: destiny, purity, leadership, and the eternal struggle between power and virtue. Excalibur isn't just the sword of King Arthur. It's the embodiment of what it means to be worthy of greatness. When Arthur first pulls the sword from the stone or receives it from the Lady of the Lake, depending on which version you believe, he doesn't just gain a weapon, he gains legitimacy. The sword, glowing with divine approval, transforms an ordinary boy into a chosen king. It's not the strength of his arms that matters, it's the purity of his heart. That single act, drawing the blade, symbolizes one of the oldest human dreams, that destiny chooses us not because of who we are, but because of what we're meant to become. In a world ruled by bloodlines and brute force, Excalibur stood as a challenge to corruption and privilege. It said, "The right to lead is not inherited, it's earned." The blade itself carries an aura of mystery and duality. On one hand, Excalibur represents power, unmatched, almost divine. It cuts through iron, blinds enemies with its brilliance, and shields its bearer from harm. On the other hand, it represents responsibility. The sword does not grant Arthur invincibility, it demands wisdom. It's a test of the soul as much as a tool of war. To wield Excalibur is to carry the weight of a kingdom, the burden of justice, mercy, and truth. In that sense, it's not just a weapon, but a mirror, one that reflects the heart of whoever holds it. Medieval writers often described Excalibur's brilliance as otherworldly, a light that could pierce through darkness. This was no accident. In the Middle Ages, light symbolized divine truth, purity, and revelation. A shining sword wasn't just beautiful, it was holy. Excalibur's radiance became a metaphor for enlightenment, a beacon in a dark and divided world. For the knights of Arthur's court, the sword represented the unifying ideal of Camelot, a realm built not on greed or conquest, but on justice and equality. In this way, Excalibur became the beating heart of the Arthurian dream. But its symbolism runs even deeper. In the spiritual sense, Excalibur can be seen as the sword of discernment, the weapon that separates truth from falsehood, good from evil. Every swing, every gleam is a reminder that true strength lies not in violence, but in clarity and righteousness. This is why Arthur's story has lasted so long. It isn't about conquest, but about the moral duty of leadership. The sword doesn't make the king. The king must prove himself worthy of the sword. Interestingly, Excalibur's symbolism isn't limited to Christian imagery. Beneath its medieval retellings lie echoes of older Celtic and pagan beliefs. In Celtic mythology, swords were seen as living spirits, entities of divine power. Warriors who possessed such blades were believed to be chosen by the gods. Excalibur, born from the water or stone, fits perfectly into this ancient pattern. The stone symbolizes the earth, permanence, and the mortal world. The lake symbolizes the spirit realm, mystery, and transformation. Arthur's connection to both suggests that he is not just a king of men, but a bridge between realms, between the tangible and the mystical, the human and the divine. Even the act of returning the sword to the lake carries deep meaning. It is the circle of power completed, a reminder that what is given by destiny must one day be surrendered back to it. When Sir Bedivere finally throws Excalibur into the water, and the lady's hand rises to claim it, that moment becomes more than the end of Arthur's story. It becomes a lesson about humility, about letting go of power with the same grace with which it was received. The sword does not belong to any one man. It belongs to the ideal it represents. For many, Excalibur also symbolizes hope, the eternal belief that righteousness will rise when darkness falls. Throughout history, the story of Arthur has resurfaced during times of uncertainty. Medieval kings used the legend to justify their rule. Poets invoked it to inspire moral renewal. Even today, Excalibur continues to appear in films, literature, and art as a symbol of integrity in the face of corruption. Every retelling reminds us of the same truth, that true power must serve, not dominate. Some scholars have compared Excalibur to the concept of the hero's weapon found in myths across cultures, from Odin's Gungnir to Achilles' spear. These weapons aren't just tools of destruction. They're extensions of the hero's soul, representing courage, destiny, and sacrifice. What makes Excalibur unique, however, is its moral code. It doesn't just glorify victory, it glorifies virtue. It's the sword of conscience, a reminder that even kings are bound by higher laws. And perhaps that's why Excalibur still captivates us. In every age, humanity struggles with the same question: who deserves power? The legend answers it through the symbolism of the sword. Power, it says, is sacred. It must be wielded by the worthy, by those who value honor over ambition, truth over comfort, justice over pride. In Arthur's hands, Excalibur shines not because of its blade, but because of the heart that holds it. Its magic is not in its metal, but in its meaning, the timeless truth that greatness without virtue is nothing but illusion. For centuries, the question has haunted scholars, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. Was Excalibur a legend crafted from imagination or a real sword lost to time? The answer lies somewhere between myth and history, in that mysterious space where stories become memory and memory becomes belief. As we stand at the crossroads of fact and fable, the search for Excalibur transforms from a hunt for metal to a quest for meaning. Could the legendary sword of King Arthur have once existed in physical form, or is its power rooted in something far more profound, the collective soul of humanity's longing for truth and destiny? The earliest records of Arthur's sword appear not in royal archives or battlefield relics, but in the glowing pages of medieval manuscripts. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, written in the 12th century, gave Arthur his mighty blade but left its origins vague, describing it simply as a weapon of unmatched brilliance. Later storytellers, poets, priests, and minstrels expanded upon it, layering the myth with divine symbolism, magical creation, and ancient prophecy. Yet, for all the details added over the centuries, none could answer the most fundamental question: where did the story come from? If we trace the roots far enough, the trail leads back into the mists of pre-Christian Britain, where swords were not merely weapons but sacred symbols of kingship and divine favor. The Celts, who roamed these lands long before Arthur's name was ever spoken, believed that lakes and rivers were portals to the spirit world. They cast their finest weapons into the waters as offerings to their gods, hoping for protection in war and peace. To them, a sword retrieved from a lake was not just a blade, it was a divine gift. It's not difficult to imagine how, generations later, such rituals evolved into the tale of the Lady of the Lake presenting Arthur with Excalibur. The story may have changed, but the spirit remained, a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between the real and the mythical. Historians and archaeologists have found countless Excaliburs across Britain, swords buried in peat bogs, resting in rivers, or discovered in ancient graves. Each discovery reignites the question, could this be the one? In 1968, divers in Scotland pulled from the River Tweed a well-preserved sword dating to the 6th century, remarkably close to Arthur's supposed era. Others have been uncovered near Glastonbury, Cornwall, and Wales, each linked in some way to Arthurian lore. Though most of these artifacts have been identified as ritual or ceremonial weapons, the fascination never fades. Every new find becomes another whisper in the long conversation between legend and reality. And yet, many scholars argue that Excalibur was never meant to be found because it was never meant to be literal. To them, Excalibur was a story's way of expressing something humanity has always understood but struggled to put into words, that true power comes not from force, but from destiny. In this sense, Excalibur is an allegory, the shining embodiment of rightful authority. Its disappearance into the lake at the end of Arthur's life is not the loss of a weapon, but the passing of an ideal. The sword returns to the water because its purpose is complete, waiting for the next soul worthy of its light. But what if there was a real sword, a weapon so extraordinary it inspired generations of storytellers? Could an ancient sword of exceptional craftsmanship, owned by a warrior king, have sparked the legend? It's not impossible. Across Europe, archaeologists have unearthed swords so advanced for their time that they defy explanation. Forged with techniques lost for centuries, they shimmer with craftsmanship beyond what was thought possible in the early medieval age. A real sword, perhaps made of steel so pure it gleamed brighter than any other, could easily have seemed magical to those who saw it. To them, it would have been no ordinary blade. It would have been Excalibur. Some historians point to the fusion of different traditions as evidence that the legend of Excalibur grew from multiple, real and symbolic origins. The Celtic Calidfulch, the Irish Calibog, and even the Norse swordgram all share similar traits, shining weapons of destiny, forged by mystical hands, wielded by chosen heroes. These myths, circulating across Europe, could have merged over time into a single, unified story, one sword to rule them all in memory and imagination. Then there are those who look at Excalibur not through archaeology or mythology, but psychology. They argue that Excalibur endures because it represents the eternal human yearning for legitimacy and purpose. The sword in the stone is the ultimate test, a metaphor for every moment in life when someone must rise above doubt to prove their worth. The Lady of the Lake is the voice of fate, offering strength when it's most needed, but demanding humility in return. Excalibur, in this light, is not lost. It exists in every act of courage, every moral choice, every person who strives to be worthy of their destiny. And yet, the human mind cannot resist the allure of the tangible. People want to see Excalibur, to touch the myth. That's why the search continues, through ancient ruins, across fog-shrouded moors, beneath cold waters where reflections play tricks on the eye. Every ripple could be a clue, every glimmer a fragment of the past. Perhaps somewhere under the murky depths of a forgotten lake lies a sword rusted with time, not shining gold, not glowing with magic, but real, solid, and human. Maybe that's the true beauty of Excalibur, not that it's been lost, but that it keeps calling us to look deeper, to believe that some legends aren't meant to fade, but to guide us forever through the mists of time. And so, the legend of King Arthur's Excalibur endures, not just as a tale of knights, kings, or ancient battles, but as a mirror reflecting humanity's eternal quest for truth, honor, and destiny. Whether forged by mortal hands or born of divine will, Excalibur remains more than a sword. It is the embodiment of ideals that transcend time, courage in the face of doubt, virtue in the grip of power, and faith when the line between myth and reality fades into mist. The mystery of Excalibur may never be solved, and perhaps that's what gives it life. For every unanswered question, there lies a spark that keeps history alive, a whisper that tells us to look beyond what we can see and believe in what might still be hidden. Maybe Excalibur was never meant to be found because it was never truly lost. It lives in the stories we tell, in the hearts of those who seek purpose, and in the eternal hope that truth, like the sword itself, still waits beneath the surface, gleaming, waiting for the one who dares to pull it from the stone once more.